Individual rights and collective rights. How do they respond to immigration laws and policies that we have here in Canada? This is lesson 5.3. We're going to be taking a closer look at some refugee decisions that have been made in the past, something called the Singh decision, and how do collective rights respond to the needs of immigrants in Canadian society. So stick around and let's learn something. All right, 5.3 is today's lesson. How do individual and collective rights of Canadians influence immigration laws and policies? I promise this is going to be a much shorter lesson than what lesson 5.2 was, but I really enjoyed teaching 5.2. So let's move on to 5.3. We're going to take a look at those individual rights first. And we're going to start with something called the Singh decision. Satman Singh is where the Singh decision comes from. This was happening in 1985. He wanted refugee status, but under the Immigration Act of 1976, he was rejected that refugee status. And we're not going to go into too much details as why he was rejected, because we don't need to know those intricate details of his case for this lesson. But he was denied refugee status, but he was not allowed to state his case or appeal the decision from the refugee board. So he went and he took the Canadian government to court, and in its ruling, the Supreme Court ruled that this violated Section 7 of the Charter. Remember that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms came into effect in 1982, and this decision violated Section 7. Now, Section 7 is all about the security of the person, and it states that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, exception in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. And people claiming refugee status now, here in our present year, they have the right to a hearing, but they have to be physically present in Canada for that hearing to actually take place. These claimants, they need the basic necessities of life. We learned this in lesson 5.2, that we need to give our refugees the necessities of life while they wait for their hearing, and this has to be paid for by the government, because refugees can't go and work until they are fully processed. And the Immigration and Refugee Board, it was created in response to this so that these hearings can take place. Now we're going to fast forward many years into a current issue that we are having in Canada right now, and that is asylum seekers coming to Canada from the United States. In recent years, more and more people are crossing the American-Canadian border seeking refugee status. And the average cost for an asylum seeker crossing into Canada, that's outside of the legal border points, is about $14,000. And this is adding up to about $400 million per year for the federal government. Now, people who enter Canada at an official border crossing from the United States, they can't make a refugee claim because of an agreement between the two countries. They can't claim refugee status from the United States. They can claim refugee status in Canada if they come from another country. They can claim refugee status into the United States if they come from another country, but from the United States into Canada, you cannot claim a refugee status. That's if you are entering through an official border crossing. However, there is the ability to cross the border unofficially and then seek asylum here in Canada. And right now, this is our current issue. And back in 2017, Prime Minister Trudeau tweeted, "To those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canadians will welcome you regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength. Hashtag welcome to Canada." So this is an issue that we are currently dealing with here in Canada. But what about when I go back to the initial question of lesson 5.3? How do individual and collective rights of Canadians influence immigration laws and policy? So we saw some individual rights, but what about collective rights? Our Assembly of First Nations is an organization that was created to protect the rights, to protect the claims, and to protect the treaties of our First Nations. And there's a part of the Assembly of First Nations that oppose immigration because Canada needs to address some of the issues that are facing our First Nations. And they feel that the government should be focusing more on educating and training and giving job opportunities to our Indigenous people, because our Indigenous people are partners in Canada. And yes, I realize there's another typo there when I have Canada. And our Indigenous people are partners in Canada, and they hold collective rights. And the treaties and the agreements made between our First Nations and the Canadian government is to work together and share in Canada's prosperity. But yet many actually, First Nations continue to face many problems, including health, education, and employment challenges that are directly linked to poverty. So these challenges that our First Nations are facing are creating obstacles for many to participate in Canada's economy. Now, yes, I know I have another typo there. So if Canada is then focusing on immigration to fulfill many of its economic needs, why the Assembly of First Nations is saying, well, why is Canada not addressing the issues that exist already here in Canada and dealing with the issues that are here in Canada before they deal with the issues for immigration? So definitely something to think about. We've had many discussions here in class about this, and definitely a thought-provoking question. All right, I told you this was going to be a shorter lesson, so now you're going to head over to your notebooks and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.